It was a cold, moonless night when Claire found herself stranded on the desolate stretch of Highway 47. Her car had sputtered to a stop, the engine giving a final, ominous clunk before going silent. With no cell service and no sign of life for miles, her only option was to flag down a passing car. She wrapped her jacket tightly around her and stuck out her thumb. Minutes passed, then an hour. The silence of the highway was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the barren trees. Finally, a pair of headlights pierced the darkness. A beat-up pickup truck slowed to a stop beside her. The driver was a man in his mid-40s wearing a worn baseball cap. His face was rough and weathered, but his smile seemed genuine. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice gravelly. Claire hesitated but nodded. "Yeah, my car broke down a few miles back." He gestured for her to hop in. "Hop in. I can take you to the next town." Grateful, Claire climbed into the passenger seat. The truck smelled faintly of oil and tobacco, but it was warm. As they drove, the man introduced himself as Joe. "Not many people travel this road at night," Joe said, his eyes fixed on the empty highway. Claire nodded. "I was trying to get to my sister's place. Guess I wasn't lucky tonight." Joe chuckled. "Well, you're lucky I came along. Not everyone who picks up hitchhikers has good intentions." The way he said it sent a chill down Claire's spine. She forced a nervous laugh, glancing at him out of the corner of her eye. They drove in silence for a while, the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires the only sounds. Claire tried to relax, but something about Joe's demeanor felt off. His hands gripped the wheel a little too tightly, and his gaze lingered on her a little too long when he thought she wasn't looking. "So," Joe said, suddenly breaking the silence, "you ever hear the stories about this highway?" Claire frowned. "What stories?" Joe smirked. "They say it's haunted. People see things, ghosts, shadows. Some folks disappear without a trace." Claire's unease grew. "Sounds like urban legends to me." Joe shrugged. "Maybe, but I wouldn't dismiss it too quickly." As they rounded a bend, Claire spotted a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a woman in a tattered dress, her face obscured by long dark hair. She didn't move as the truck approached, just stood there staring into the distance. "Did you see that?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. Joe nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, I see her all the time." Claire's heart raced. "What do you mean, all the time?" Joe didn't answer. Instead, he pressed harder on the gas, the truck accelerating down the highway. Claire twisted in her seat, looking back. The woman was still standing there, but now her head was turned, her face watching them as they sped away. "Who was that?" Claire demanded. Joe's jaw tightened. "Just someone who doesn't belong here anymore." The cryptic answer sent a shiver through Claire. She wanted to press him for more, but something in his tone warned her not to. Minutes later, the truck's headlights flickered. The engine sputtered, then died, leaving them in darkness. "Damn it," Joe muttered, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. "What's wrong?" Claire asked, her voice shaky. Joe grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment. "Stay here. I'll check under the hood." He climbed out, leaving Claire alone in the truck. She watched as he popped the hood and leaned over the engine, the beam of his flashlight casting long shadows. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. She spun around, but the back seat was empty. The hairs on her neck stood on end as a faint whisper reached her ears. "Get out." Claire's breath caught in her throat. "Joe?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. Joe didn't respond. He was still outside, his flashlight flickering. "Get out!" The whisper came again, louder this time. Claire's hands trembled as she fumbled with the door handle. She scrambled out of the truck, her eyes darting around the darkness. "Joe!" she called, her voice shaking. He turned to her, his face pale. "We need to go, now!" Before she could ask why, she saw it. A shadowy figure standing in the middle of the road, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. It had no face, but she could feel its gaze piercing through her. Joe grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the truck. "Get in!" They climbed back into the truck, but the engine refused to start. The shadowy figure began to move toward them, its movements unnaturally jerky. "Come on," Joe muttered, turning the key desperately. The figure was almost at the truck now. Claire could feel an icy coldness seeping into the cab, freezing her breath in her lungs. Finally, the engine roared to life. Joe slammed on the gas, the truck lurching forward. The figure disappeared in the rearview mirror, but the oppressive feeling lingered. Neither of them spoke as they sped down the highway. When they finally reached the next town, Joe pulled into a gas station and turned to Claire. "This is where you get off," he said, his voice firm. Claire didn't argue. She climbed out, her legs shaky. Before she could thank him, Joe leaned out the window. "Whatever you do, don't look back." The warning sent a fresh wave of fear through her. She nodded and stepped away from the truck. As Joe drove off, Claire felt an overwhelming urge to turn around. She fought it, her heart pounding in her chest. But as she walked toward the gas station, she couldn't resist. She glanced over her shoulder. The shadowy figure was standing at the edge of the parking lot, its featureless face turned toward her. Claire ran into the gas station, the fluorescent lights and the hum of the refrigerator units a stark contrast to the darkness outside. She didn't stop running until she was inside, surrounded by the safety of other people. But even then, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched.